Dear soul, there is a silence surrounding your heart that no one else can hear. It arrives in the deepest hours of the night, when the world has finally stopped its relentless spinning and the noise of daily life fades into a hush so complete that you can hear the rhythm of your own breathing. It is in those moments, when the stars seem to whisper secrets that only heaven remembers, that you feel something stirring deep within the chambers of your spirit. You have been wondering why certain energies feel different lately, why familiar emotions suddenly carry the weight of an approaching storm, why the air around you seems charged with something you cannot name but can undeniably sense. There is a shift taking place, and although you may not yet understand its full meaning, your soul already recognizes the significance of what is unfolding. Today, you are being invited to listen carefully, not with the ears that hear the sounds of the world, but with the deeper hearing that belongs to the spirit. There is a message woven into the fabric of this moment, a message that has been traveling toward you across distances you cannot measure, carried by forces that operate beyond the boundaries of human understanding. This message does not arrive by accident. It arrives because the universe has been watching your journey with infinite patience, noting every struggle, honoring every sacrifice, and preparing a revelation that your heart has been quietly longing to receive. You may have dismissed the subtle signs that have been appearing around you, the unexpected memories that surface without invitation, the dreams that linger long after waking, the strange sense of knowing that something important is about to change. But heaven does not send signals without purpose, and everything you have been feeling is part of a larger design that is slowly making itself known. Someone connected to your journey is standing in a place where confidence has faded into trembling. This person, whose presence once occupied a significant space in the landscape of your life, is experiencing something they never anticipated. The strength they once displayed so effortlessly has become fragile, like glass that appears solid from a distance but reveals hairline fractures when examined closely. Behind every smile they offer the world is a fear they cannot hide from themselves, a growing awareness that something essential has been lost, something that cannot be replaced by the distractions they have used to fill the emptiness. They are afraid, not of the world and its judgments, but of a much more intimate reckoning. They are afraid that one day you will see the truth they have tried so hard to conceal, the truth about what they feel, what they regret, and what they now understand about the choices they made when they still had the chance to choose differently. You may believe this message is about their actions, about the things they did or failed to do, about the words they spoke carelessly or the silences they allowed to grow into walls between your hearts. But heaven gently asks you to look deeper than the surface of events and circumstances. What is happening within this person's spirit is not simply a reaction to consequences. It is not merely the discomfort of realizing that decisions carry weight. What is happening is something far more profound, something that touches the very foundation of who they are and who they are becoming. The shaking in their spirit is not born from punishment. It comes from remembrance. There is a difference between suffering because the world has imposed its justice and suffering because the soul has awakened to its own truth. What this person is experiencing belongs to the second category. Their spirit is trembling because memory has become a mirror, and in that mirror they are seeing reflections they can no longer avoid. Every moment they ignored your kindness now echoes through the corridors of their heart with a clarity that startles them. Every opportunity they had to choose honesty instead of distance, vulnerability instead of pride, connection instead of withdrawal, returns to them like a familiar wind that carries the scent of a season they can never revisit. Every word they never spoke, every feeling they never expressed, every gesture of love they withheld because fear whispered that vulnerability was weakness, has become heavier than all the words they actually said. The silence they once chose so easily now presses against their chest with a weight they did not expect, and they are beginning to understand that some silences do not protect, they imprison. And now they wonder, in the quiet moments when no one is watching, when the performances they give for the rest of the world have ended and they are left alone with the unfiltered truth of their own thoughts, they wonder something that follows them everywhere like a shadow they cannot outrun. They wonder whether they waited too long. They carry that question into every room they enter, every conversation they attempt, every restless night when sleep refuses to come because the mind insists on replaying scenes from a chapter they thought was closed. They carry it in the mornings when they reach for their phone and almost send a message but stop because they do not know what words could possibly bridge the distance they created. They carry it in the afternoons when something small and ordinary, a song, a place, a phrase spoken by a stranger, triggers a memory so vivid that for a moment they forget where they are and find themselves transported back to a time when your presence was something they could reach out and touch. They carry it in the evenings when the loneliness they once mistook for independence reveals itself for what it truly is, the absence of something sacred that they did not honor when it was within their grasp. While the world sees an ordinary person walking through ordinary days, fulfilling obligations, maintaining appearances, going through the motions of a life that looks acceptable from the outside, heaven sees something entirely different. Heaven sees a soul replaying old memories with the desperate attention of someone searching for a lost key, turning over every moment, examining every exchange, trying to identify the exact point where everything began to slip away. They revisit conversations that seemed insignificant at the time, casual words exchanged over meals, brief moments of connection that they dismissed because they believed there would always be more, and now those conversations feel like crossroads, pivotal intersections where a different word, a softer tone, a willingness to be present instead of distracted could have changed the entire trajectory of what followed. They see now what they could not see then, and that vision, arriving too late to change the past but too powerful to ignore, is what keeps them awake when the rest of the world sleeps. Their greatest fear is not losing comfort. It is not the fear of being alone, although loneliness has become a more constant companion than they ever imagined it would be. It is not the fear of judgment from others, although they are aware that people around them have noticed the changes in their demeanor, the way their laughter does not quite reach their eyes, the way their attention drifts in the middle of conversations as though they are listening to a voice no one else can hear. Their greatest fear, the one that lives beneath all the other fears like a root system hidden underground, is discovering that the light they once took for granted has learned to shine without them. They are terrified of the possibility that you have found peace, that you have rebuilt your world, that you have discovered a version of happiness that does not include their name. Not because they begrudge you joy, but because your independence would be the final confirmation that what they lost was not temporary but permanent, not a pause but an ending, not a chapter they can reopen but a book that has been closed and placed on a shelf they can no longer reach. Dear soul, you have spent countless nights asking questions that seem to have no answers. You lay in the darkness and asked why your heart had to experience silence when all it wanted was understanding. You questioned your worth during seasons when the person who should have affirmed it chose instead to look away. You questioned your patience, wondering whether holding on was strength or foolishness, whether waiting for someone to recognize your value was an act of love or an act of self-abandonment. You even questioned your ability to love, wondering whether something within you was flawed, whether the tenderness you offered so freely was somehow insufficient, whether the depth of your feeling was a gift or a burden that drove people away. Those questions carved deep grooves into the landscape of your inner world, and there were moments when the weight of not knowing felt heavier than any answer could have been. Heaven has watched every tear that no one noticed, every moment of heartbreak that you endured in private, every smile you manufactured for the benefit of others while your spirit ached behind it, every prayer you whispered into the silence of an empty room, wondering whether anyone or anything was listening, has been witnessed, recorded, and honored by forces that operate with a compassion so vast that human language cannot adequately describe it. Nothing has been forgotten. Not a single tear has been wasted. Not a single moment of your suffering has been overlooked or dismissed as insignificant. The universe keeps meticulous accounts, not for the purpose of punishment but for the purpose of restoration, and every ounce of pain you endured has been carefully measured against the blessings that are being prepared for you even now, in this very moment, as you read these words and feel something stirring in the depths of your being. There is a quiet transformation happening beyond what your eyes can see. While you focused on healing, while you gathered the broken pieces of your heart and painstakingly began fitting them back together, while you learned to stand on your own 2 feet and discovered reservoirs of strength you never knew you possessed, another heart was learning the weight of regret. The emptiness this person feels is not a punishment imposed from the outside but a teacher that arrived from within, and it is teaching lessons that pride never could. Pride builds walls and calls them castles. Pride mistakes isolation for sovereignty and confusion for mystery. But emptiness, the kind that comes from recognizing what was lost, dismantles those walls 1 brick at a time, and the demolition is neither gentle nor quick. It is a slow, grinding process that strips away pretense and leaves nothing but the raw truth of what the heart actually needs, what it has always needed, what it was too afraid or too proud or too distracted to acknowledge when acknowledgement would have made all the difference. Sometimes grace disappears so slowly that a person does not realize it until they begin searching for the warmth they once carried inside them without effort. They wake up one morning and notice that the ease they once felt has been replaced by a vague heaviness. They look around at their circumstances and wonder why joy feels distant even when the external conditions of their life appear favorable. They achieve things they thought would bring satisfaction and discover that victories seem hollow, that accomplishments ring with an emptiness that confuses them because they cannot identify its source. They find themselves in rooms full of people and feel more alone than they have ever felt. They laugh, but the laughter fades too quickly, evaporating like morning mist before the sun, leaving behind nothing but the awareness that something fundamental is missing. They search for that missing element in new experiences, new relationships, new pursuits, new distractions, but nothing fills the space because the space was not created by the absence of novelty. It was created by the absence of something, someone, whose presence they failed to appreciate when appreciation was still possible. Deep inside, beneath the layers of rationalization and self-justification and carefully constructed narratives about why things happened the way they did, they already know the answer. They know it with a certainty that transcends logic, a certainty that lives in the body as much as in the mind, a certainty that makes their stomach tighten and their throat constrict when they allow themselves to sit with it for more than a few seconds. It is not because love abandoned them. Love does not abandon. Love is patient and enduring and infinitely creative in its attempts to reach the hearts it has chosen. What happened is not that love left. What happened is that they failed to nurture a gift that heaven placed gently into their path, a gift wrapped not in the dramatic gestures that the world celebrates but in the quiet, consistent, unglamorous beauty of genuine care, steady presence, and authentic devotion. They treated something sacred as though it were ordinary, and now the ordinary things in their life feel empty because nothing else carries the same frequency of truth. Now they fear the moment your eyes finally meet theirs again. Whether that meeting happens in person, through a message, through a mutual connection, or even through the strange and unexplainable channels that the universe uses to bring souls back into each other's orbits, they fear it. Not because they expect anger, They have prepared themselves for anger and could perhaps endure it, because anger at least confirms that feelings still exist, that the connection still carries enough charge to generate heat. Not because they expect rejection, although rejection is certainly a possibility they have considered during their sleepless nights. What they fear most deeply, what makes their spirit tremble with a vulnerability they have never experienced before, is the possibility of seeing peace in you. They fear looking into your eyes and finding not rage, not sorrow, not longing, but calm. They fear discovering that you have arrived at a place of wholeness that does not require their participation, that you have built a sanctuary within yourself that stands on foundations they had no hand in laying, that you have learned to value yourself with a quiet, unshakable certainty that renders their approval, their attention, their love, their very presence entirely optional. That possibility, the possibility of your peace, shakes them more than any storm, more than any confrontation, more than any dramatic scene of heartbreak. Because your peace would mean that the power dynamic they unconsciously relied upon, the assumption that you would always be waiting, always be available, always be willing to rearrange your world to accommodate their indecision, has fundamentally and irreversibly shifted. Dear soul, do not mistake someone else's regret as permission to forget your own growth. It can be tempting, when you sense that a person who once caused you pain is now experiencing their own season of reckoning, to feel a pull toward returning to familiar patterns. The heart has a long memory for love, and the echoes of what once was can sound remarkably similar to the music of what could be. But the purpose of this season is not to make you chase what ran away. It is not to send you backward into situations that required you to diminish yourself in order to maintain someone else's comfort. It is not to reopen wounds that have only recently begun to heal so that another person can explore whether they are ready to treat you differently this time. The purpose of this season is far greater and far more generous than that. It is to remind you, with the full authority of heaven behind the reminder, that genuine love never asks you to shrink your light. It never requires you to make yourself smaller so that someone else can feel larger. It never demands that you silence your truth so that another person can avoid the discomfort of hearing it. Genuine love celebrates your brightness, makes room for your expansion, and finds joy in your growth even when that growth changes the dynamics of the relationship. Your heart has been quietly rebuilding itself during the time that felt like emptiness. What seemed like stagnation was actually construction. What felt like loneliness was actually solitude, and there is a profound difference between the two. Loneliness is the experience of missing what you do not have. Solitude is the experience of discovering what you are. During your season of solitude, you have been uncovering layers of yourself that would have remained hidden if someone else's presence had continued to occupy the center of your attention. You have learned things about your own resilience that could only be learned through endurance. You have discovered dimensions of your own compassion that could only be revealed through suffering. You have accessed depths of your own wisdom that could only be reached through the patient, unglamorous work of sitting with your pain instead of running from it. Every disappointment you experience became another stone in the foundation of your wisdom. Every promise that was broken taught you something about the kind of promises you will accept going forward. Every time someone chose convenience over commitment, you learn to recognize the difference between words that are spoken and words that are lived. Every lonely night, every evening spent in the company of your own thoughts when you would have preferred the warmth of another's presence, became another prayer carried upward, another offering placed on the altar of your own becoming, another seed planted in soil that the world could not see but that heaven was tending with infinite care. Every unanswered question, every mystery that refused to resolve itself on your timeline, every situation that defied your attempts to control it, became another reason to trust the timing of a wisdom greater than your own, a timing that does not operate according to human urgency but according to divine precision. And while you wondered whether anyone noticed your silent strength, while you questioned whether your perseverance was visible to anyone besides yourself, while you feared that you were walking through fire and no one could see the flames or smell the smoke, heaven counted every step. Every single step you took through the darkness, every decision to keep going when stopping would have been easier, every choice to remain open when closing your heart would have provided temporary relief, every act of faith disguised as an ordinary Tuesday, an ordinary Wednesday, an ordinary Thursday lived with quiet courage, was noted and honored by the intelligence that governs all things. You were never invisible. You were never forgotten. You were never alone, even in the moments when aloneness felt like the only truth your body could confirm. The story is still unfolding. The narrative of your life has not reached its conclusion, and the chapters that seemed to end in disappointment were not final. They were transitional. They were the passages between one phase and another, the bridges between who you were and who you are becoming, the necessary pauses that allow the music of your life to gather breath before the next movement begins. The pages that once carried sorrow, that were stained with the ink of grief and confusion and self-doubt, are beginning to fill with something new. Unexpected mercy is finding its way to your doorstep in forms you did not anticipate. Unexpected conversations are beginning to occur, words exchanged with strangers or old friends that carry messages your spirit needs to hear. Unexpected clarity is dawning in corners of your mind that have been shadowed for far too long, illuminating connections and patterns and purposes that were always present but that you could not see while the tears were still falling. Whether this special person returns with humility, having undergone their own transformation and arriving with a genuine willingness to honor what they previously neglected, or whether they continue walking their own path, pursuing their own lessons, learning what they need to learn on a timeline that may or may not intersect with yours again, one truth remains unchanged and unchangeable and beyond the reach of any circumstance to alter. You were never created to beg for the love you deserve. You were never designed to stand at the gates of someone else's attention and plead for entry. You were never meant to present evidence of your worthiness to a jury that was not qualified to judge it. You were created to recognize love when it arrives in its genuine form, to distinguish between the love that liberates and the love that imprisons, between the love that grows and the love that merely takes, between the love that honors the fullness of who you are and the love that only values the parts of you that serve someone else's needs. Your purpose is not to convince anyone of your value. Your purpose is to know your value so deeply, so unshakably, so completely that your very presence becomes an invitation for others to rise to the level of love you embody. So if the winds begin to shift in the coming days and weeks, if the energy around you starts to feel different in ways you cannot quite explain, if old doors that seemed permanently sealed unexpectedly begin to show signs of opening, if familiar names that had faded from your daily thoughts suddenly return with a vividness and frequency that feels more than coincidental, greet the moment with wisdom instead of fear. Do not rush toward what is approaching simply because the familiarity of it triggers the longing you have carried. Do not allow the memory of what you once felt to override the knowledge of what you have learned. Do not confuse the excitement of reconnection with the peace of genuine reconciliation, because they are not the same thing. Excitement is temporary and based on emotion. Peace is enduring and based on truth. Listen before you leap. Give yourself the gift of patience that you have already proven you possess. Pay attention not only to the words that are spoken but to the energy behind them, the consistency beneath them, the actions that accompany them. Words are easy to produce. Anyone can arrange syllables into sentences that sound sincere. But words that are backed by changed behavior, words that arrive accompanied by humility rather than excuses, words that acknowledge the full weight of what happened without minimizing your experience or redirecting blame. Those are the words that deserve your attention. Listen for those. Wait for those. Accept nothing less. Observe before you surrender. Watch with the eyes of someone who has been educated by experience. Notice whether the person standing before you is offering something new or recycling something old with fresh packaging. Notice whether they are genuinely interested in who you have become or whether they are attempting to reconnect with who you used to be, because you are not the same person, and anyone who wants to be part of your future must be willing to meet the person you are now, not the person you were then. Observe whether their remorse is rooted in the loss of your presence or in the loss of what your presence provided them, because those two things are fundamentally different, and only the first one leads to genuine change. And remember, always remember, in every moment of decision and doubt and deliberation, that the love meant for your journey will never require you to abandon your peace. The love that heaven has designed for your life, the love that matches the frequency of your soul, the love that is worthy of the heart you carry, will never ask you to choose between connection and self-respect. It will never present itself as an ultimatum. It will never demand that you sacrifice the wholeness you have worked so hard to build. It will arrive with open hands and a humble spirit and a willingness to grow alongside you rather than asking you to shrink beside it. That is the standard. That is the truth. That is the promise that heaven has written into the architecture of your destiny, and nothing that falls short of it deserves the throne of your heart. Someone may indeed be trembling at this very moment, not because you became unreachable, not because you erected walls of bitterness or barricades of revenge, but because they finally understand the value of what they almost lost. Their trembling is not your responsibility, and their awakening is not your achievement. It is the work of their own soul, responding to the lessons that only absence can teach. You did not cause their regret, and you cannot cure it. What you can do, what you are called to do, is continue becoming the fullest expression of who you were created to be, and trust that the right people will recognize that light and choose to walk toward it with the reverence it deserves. Meanwhile, heaven asks you to keep walking, not with the frantic pace of someone trying to outrun their past, but with the steady, grounded rhythm of someone who trusts the road beneath their feet. Keep walking through the uncertain mornings and the challenging afternoons and the quiet evenings when the old questions try to return. Keep walking even when progress feels invisible, even when the destination seems no closer than it did yesterday, even when the path curves in directions you did not expect and leads through terrain you did not choose. Every step matters. Every step is counted. Every step is bringing you closer to the version of your life that your soul has always known was possible. Keep growing. Not because growth is comfortable, because it rarely is, but because growth is the evidence of life, and your spirit is fiercely, beautifully, undeniably alive. Keep growing through the books you read and the prayers you whisper and the conversations that challenge your assumptions and the moments of stillness that reveal your truth. Keep growing through the mistakes you make and the lessons you extract from them and the grace you extend to yourself when perfection proves to be the illusion it has always been. Keep growing into the person who does not need external validation to know their worth, the person who can stand in the middle of uncertainty and still feel the ground of their own being, the person whose love for themselves is not narcissism but necessity, not selfishness but survival, not arrogance but the quiet, radical act of treating themselves the way heaven has always seen them. Keep believing. Keep believing when the evidence seems to contradict the promise. Keep believing when the timeline stretches longer than your patience. Keep believing when the voices of cynicism, both internal and external, suggest that faith is foolishness and hope is naivety and trust is the luxury of those who have not been hurt enough to know better. Keep believing, because belief is not the denial of reality. It is the insistence that reality is larger than what your current circumstances suggest. It is the conviction that what you see is not all there is, that what you feel is not the final word, that what you have experienced is not the limit of what is possible. Your belief is not weakness. It is the strongest thing about you. It is the thread that has held you together through every storm, the anchor that has kept you steady through every wave, the light that has guided you through every darkness. Do not abandon it now. Not when you are this close. Not when the dawn is approaching with such determination. Your worth has never depended on another person's readiness to see it. This is perhaps the most important truth you will ever internalize, and it bears repeating until it moves from your mind to your bones, from understanding to embodiment, from something you know to something you are. Your worth is not a reflection in someone else's eyes. It is not a verdict delivered by someone else's judgment. It is not a commodity whose value fluctuates based on the demand of the market. Your worth was established before you took your first breath, encoded into the very essence of your being by the same intelligence that hung the stars in their places and taught the rivers where to flow. No one can add to it. No one can diminish it. No one can take it away. And no one's failure to recognize it changes it by even the smallest degree. Their blindness is not your darkness. Their inability to see is not your failure to shine. The light surrounding your soul has not diminished through waiting. If anything, the opposite is true. The waiting has been a refining fire, and like gold that passes through heat, you have emerged purer, more luminous, more authentically radiant than you were before. Your light has become brighter through endurance, because endurance strips away everything that is not essential and leaves only what is true. Your light has become stronger through faith, because faith is the decision to remain open when closing would be easier, and that openness allows more light to flow through you than guardedness ever could. Your light has become gentler through compassion, because the suffering you have experienced has given you the ability to recognize suffering in others and respond not with judgment but with understanding, not with superiority but with solidarity, not with the coldness of someone who has never been hurt but with the warmth of someone who has been hurt deeply and has chosen love anyway. The next chapter of your story is not written in fear. It is not composed of the anxious what-ifs and the paralyzing doubts and the relentless second-guessing that characterize the chapters you are leaving behind. The next chapter is written in hope, the kind of hope that is not naive or fragile or dependent on specific outcomes, but the kind of hope that is rooted in the deep knowledge that the universe is fundamentally oriented toward healing, toward wholeness, toward the reunion of every soul with the love it was created to experience. This hope does not promise that the road ahead will be free of challenges. It does not guarantee that every day will be easy or that every prayer will be answered in the way you expect. What it promises is that nothing you have been through has been purposeless, that the pain was not pointless, that the waiting was not wasted, and that the future holds spaces of beauty and connection and fulfillment that will make the journey worth every difficult step. And when the truth finally arrives, when the fullness of what heaven has been preparing reveals itself in your life with a clarity that takes your breath away, you will discover that everything your heart learned in silence prepared you for exactly this moment. The patience you cultivated taught you how to receive without grasping. The strength you developed taught you how to love without losing yourself. The wisdom you gained taught you how to trust without being blind. The compassion you deepened taught you how to forgive without being foolish. Every lesson, every tear, every prayer, every night of wondering was preparing you for a future where love is freely given, deeply honored, and never taken for granted. A future where you do not have to perform worthiness because your worth is assumed. A future where you do not have to beg for attention because your presence is cherished. A future where you do not have to explain your value because it is recognized, celebrated, and protected by those who have earned the privilege of standing beside you. Carry this peace with you today, dear soul. Let it settle into your bones and soften the tension in your shoulders and quiet the restless chatter of a mind that has spent too long worrying about things that are being handled by hands far more capable than your own. Let every step you take remind you that you are not walking alone, that you have never walked alone, and that the path ahead is illuminated by a love that does not flicker or fade or fail. Let every breath you draw remind you that you are here for a reason, that your presence on this earth matters in ways you cannot yet fully comprehend, and that the world needs the particular frequency of light that only you can bring. Let every beat of your heart remind you that heaven's timing, though it often confounds the impatient mind, reveals blessings only after the longest nights have passed, and that the night you have been walking through is closer to its end than you dare to believe. The dawn is coming, dear soul. It has already begun to paint the edges of your horizon with colors you have never seen. And when it arrives in its fullness, when the light breaks through with the unmistakable glory of a new beginning, you will stand in its warmth and know, with every fiber of your being, that you were held through every moment of darkness, guided through every moment of doubt, and loved through every moment of your beautiful, courageous, extraordinary life. This is not a wish. This is not a hope. This is a promise written in the language of eternity, spoken by the voice that called the universe into existence, and sealed with a love that nothing in this world or any other has the power to undo. Carry this peace with you today, and let every step remind you that heaven's timing often reveals its most breathtaking blessings only after the longest nights have finally, mercifully, beautifully passed.